Welcome to another in our series of podcasts about the Bickelhaupts Arboretum. In this podcast, we are going to discuss one of the collections that the Arboretum is most known for, its conifer collection. But first, we should make a distinction between the term evergreen and conifer, since these are terms that people tend to use synonymously, but they are actually defined different aspects of the plants themselves. The term evergreen is used to describe a plant which is able to keep their green leaves all year round. While these plants still lose their leaves throughout the year, it's a gradual loss, and it occurs throughout the year as opposed to deciduous trees that will lose their leaves all at once and go dormant for part of the year. In fact, many evergreen plants are actually found in tropical regions where the growing conditions are such that these plants don't have to deal with the harsh conditions of a colder climate for long periods of time. The term conifer, though, refers to the cone-like reproductive structure that those types of plants use to develop their seeds instead of using flowers. While many plants that produce cones are thus considered conifers are also evergreen, not all of them are. As an example, the plant tamarack, Larix laricina, is a conifer that will lose its long needle-like leaves in the fall and grow them back in the spring. While most conifers are also evergreens, not all evergreens are conifers, since many evergreen plants, as I've said, especially those in the tropics, don't actually produce cones, but rather they use flowers as their primary reproductive structures. This distinction is important as we discuss the conifer collection at the Arboretum. One of the first collections that was planted at the Arboretum was a Pinetum collection, which is classified as a collection of evergreens. This planting was done on the advice of Roy Nordine from the Morton Arboretum, who was their longtime mentor, instructor, and initial advisor for the Arboretum. Roy advised that this collection be started early, since they are typically fairly slow-growing plants as compared to other types of trees that are commonly grown in the Midwest. This collection was located in the southwest corner of the acreage and was made up of 18 original plants that came from several different sources. Over the years, though, this collection has changed quite a bit for a number of reasons. This area of the Arboretum now contains what we call the Heartland collection of dwarf and rare conifers. The conifer collection at the Arboretum is also unique in another way. As the name implies, it is made up completely of plants that are considered to be dwarf versions of their respective species. The American Conifer Society categorizes any conifer that grows about 1 to 6 inches a year and has a 10-year height of about 1 to 5 feet as a dwarf conifer. These types of conifers, which actually grow slower than normal conifers, can be beneficial in landscaping, especially in urban areas. In this podcast, David Horst, Director of Horticulture for the Arboretum, will discuss how the collection was started, how it got its name, and why it was laid out the way that it was. Now, in terms of that conifer collection, why was the conifer collection started?
It was started to promote conifers.
Okay.
And I can still remember to this day, I was out pruning in what we called the dwarf shrub collection at that time. There were signs here at the parking lot pointing out to the north field, north of the house.
Yeah.
And at that time, it was a lilac collection and an open hillside, and there was some small dwarfs, probably 100 different dwarf plants, but they were mostly deciduous with 3 or 4, maybe 5 dwarf conifers.
Okay.
And I was out there working pruning, and a gentleman walked up behind me and wanted to know where the dwarf conifer collection was. He had seen the sign and followed it, but didn't see the dwarf conifers. There was only a few there.
Oh, okay.
And I said, well, you're looking at them. And he's like, this is it? And I said, this is it. That's all we have. He talked a minute and introduced himself, and his name was Justin Chub Harper from Moline, Illinois. I had never heard of him before that time, although he was quite well known throughout the country for conifers and dwarf conifers. So we talked a few minutes, and he said he would be back. That was December of 1989, and it was in the winter of 1990. A couple months later, he arrived back and had a deal for the Bickelhaupts. Wanted to know if he would donate the plant materials, a little bit of money and some tools and help if they would be interested in starting a dwarf conifer collection here at the Arboretum. He said he had been here in December and talked to me and only had a handful of dwarf conifers for people to look at. And at this time, dwarf conifers were they'd been around a long time, but they were actually relatively unknown. to this local area here in Clinton.
Okay.
You could go to the store or to a nursery, and you could buy a couple different common ones, like birdnest spruce and Alberta spruce. But other than that, you were very limited. So Chub's idea in presenting this plan or proposal to the Bickelhaupts was to promote conifers.
But mostly that's just promote dwarf conifers.
Mostly dwarf conifers.
Okay.
But
what's the difference then between the dwarf conifer and just a regular conifer?
Okay, for example, a regular eastern white pine in this area can reach 70, 90, even 100 feet tall.
Okay.
A dwarf white pine may be anywhere from 1 foot to 4 or 5 feet, maybe 10 feet tall at maturity. Anything smaller than that native white pine that I mentioned, 70 to 100
feet. Is there a height limit? After a certain height, you're not a dwarf anymore?
No.
Okay.
The American Conifer Society actually categorizes dwarf conifers by different size groups.
Oh, okay.
Like, for example, large, medium, and dwarf, miniature. Miniature, of course, being the smallest.
The smallest, yeah.
Yeah, and the large ones can grow anywhere from 10 to maybe even 30 feet. If it's 30 feet tall, that sounds big to you and I, but compared to a 100-foot white pine, that's a dwarf.
That is a dwarf. So our conifer collection then is not just, it's mostly just dwarf conifers.
Our conifer collection is mostly dwarf conifers.
Okay.
There are a few flanking around the outside of it that are large growing, like the white pines just north of the house that are on the south side of the collection. They were planted first.
Yeah, those were founder trees, if I remember.
That's correct.
Okay, so those were founder trees. They were here first. They were here for a while. But the actual conifer collection that came later is a dwarf conifer collection. The only reason I say it is because that seems to be like a big distinction that a lot of people may not understand as they come in and think about things, that everything you're looking at is a certain type of conifer. It's not something you would find, say, in a boreal forest, for instance, where yes, you may see a dwarf, but it may not be there on purpose, sort of thing. Or it might just be some weird natural oddity. Whereas here, this is all purposefully done.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what gives them this shorter size? Do we know?
Their genetics.
It's genetics.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. The genetics of the plant, and a lot of collectors over the years have collected them, and it seems like the goal of most collectors when they're looking for these genetics that favor the traits of small size. It seems like a lot of the collectors are looking for that. When I find a plant, first off, I'm excited to have found it, put a name on it, and I really don't care if it stays real small or if it grows real large. I like to get something with a pretty shape to it, pretty color of green or yellow or variegation, whatever. But everybody's got their own trait that they're looking for, and a lot of them are for the smaller sizes because that's what homeowners living in towns prefer.
Yeah,
they can
you got a
plant
small yard, but you would like some little green space, and the dwarf is the size you want. Now, I'm guessing, and I could be wrong on this, if they're smaller in size, does that mean they don't take as much upkeep?
That's right. That's one of the main reasons Chub promoted the collection here was just what we talked about. People in towns at that time, this is back in the late 80s, early 90s, keep in mind. People were having trouble getting rid of their yard waste. A lot of people grew what we call yew bushes, and they required a lot of maintenance. You go out there 2-3 times a year, and you get the hedge trimmer out, and you trim them, and then you got to rake it up, and if you don't get it all off the plant, it turns brown and looks ugly, and eventually they get, even with the pruning, they still get up above your windows.
Yep.
A lot of people use them for foundation plantings. And Chub, in his proposal to the Bickelhaupts, suggested that these would be low maintenance. If people selected the proper plant to plant around their house, it would be good in the landscape for 20-25 years. Where the yews required a lot of maintenance, you could plant the dwarf conifer and just let it grow. And maybe you had to do a little fine-tuning to it here and there, but overall, it was very, very low maintenance.
So just a little bit of shaping maybe here or there, taking off some of the dead stuff and promoting its growth.
And with the dwarf conifers, there was a lot more variety of colors and shapes. Over the years, particularly, this has become true. You have weeping forms that you can plant on the corner of your house. You can stake them up to whatever desired height you like and let them grow, and then they grow and cascade to the ground.
And by weeping, the stems and the leaves and the things sort of just kind of look like they're falling, not upright as a lot of the pines and other types of conifers are, but the limbs hang to a certain extent.
Yep.
And a lot of people that when they think weeping, they think willows. Weeping willow is the infamous one that everybody thinks about. But these are These are actual conifers that the everything hangs almost, and that's where they get that weeping feature. Correct?
Yep, and that to a lot of people gives a desirable look in their landscape, or different texture and form.
Yeah, it's unique. It breaks up things.
Yep.
And a lot of folks like that.
Yep. And then you have a lot of different colors with dwarf conifers, where with the yews you were primarily a shade of green, but with dwarf conifers you can go from all the shades of green, blues, yellows, variegated forms. So you have a lot more selection available. But like I said earlier, at the beginning there wasn't near as many different selections. Over the years there have become a lot. They've become very popular, not only with collectors, but with landscapers that install them in landscapes. The maintenance has been a big plus for them. And that was a big selling point for Chub when he presented it to the Bickelhaupts. And they agreed 100% and felt that it would be a worthy collection to add here at the Bickelhaupt Arboretum.
So when Chub came, he saw a small amount in the collection. Do you remember how many were in the collection initially when Chub first came and looked and said, this is it?
I believe there were 4 or 5.
So you start with 4 or 5. Chub gets involved. What does he bring it up to?
Well, first, the 4 or 5, out of the 4 or 5, there are still 3 in the collection today.
Oh, wow.
Which is pretty neat.
That is pretty neat. So that puts them at, 30 years old?
Yeah.
About, give or take? Yeah.
One of them I think is 37 now.
37.
So that's amazing. They're still there and they still look good. Of course, they've gotten a lot larger than what we thought they were going to become. But since then, over the years, when we first started planting, which would have been in 1991, the startup year, we started out with 130, I believe. We eventually got up to 750 in the collection. And then over the years, thinning, too close together. At the beginning, we didn't know how large some of these were going to get. And some of them were experimental, so we had no clue, really. We just kind of had to guess.
Yep.
And then also, Chub always says we have to plant them closer at the beginning in the beds, because if you plant them and give them proper space, it's going to look like an empty bed for a long time. These are dwarfs, so they don't grow fast.
Yeah.
So we planted them close, and we knew we had to transplant a bunch in the future. And we also evaluated them, and over time decided that some of them weren't worthy of being in the collection, so we removed them.
Okay.
And then over the years, we've decided to remove others that became crowded. They're too big to move, obviously.
Yeah.
And now we're down to about 450 today.
450 and that's 450 unique.
That's right. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And when we started out, one of the propositions to the Bickelhaupts that Chub made was that he wanted to have the old time-tested selections, which, remember, they had 4 or 5 at the beginning.
4 or 5, yep.
He wanted to have those that were already named and proven throughout the United States, but he also wanted to raise some that they call witches' brooms.
Okay.
These are kind of experimental plants or mutations that form on a tree, and you collect it, propagate it. He wanted to have these, and he wanted to have them labeled properly too, so people knew they weren't able to be purchased at a nursery.
Okay.
They were just kind of in the study stages at this point.
Once the proposal for this new conifer collection had been approved by the Bickelhaupts, the work of selecting a location and getting it ready began. David discusses some of the challenges that came with this initial task. So we have 450, and they occupy 2 acres of the entire arboretum?
That's right, the 2 acres to the north of the building. When Chub proposed the idea to the Bickelhaupts, he wanted a location that was sun and had good drainage.
Okay.
And to the north.
To the north, it makes sense because of the way the hills and the topography of the land sit.
That's right, and the Bickelhaupts had just installed a waterfall on the hillside, and Chub thought this would make a wonderful addition for that.
Okay.
So we put a little wooden bridge over it, and we graveled a path from the north parking lot to the bridge, or the waterfall, I guess. The bridge at the waterfall, to lead people up,
all right.
which made a big difference.
It did, yeah. Okay.
At one time, there used to be a brick factory just where you enter into the collection from the parking lot. And there was a big hole there. I kind of ran into this unexpectedly. I talked with Russ Pollard, a neighbor, for many years afterwards, and he was the one that had filled the hole in where they used to quarry the clay.
Oh, okay. And when you said brick factory, I'm like, wait a second, I don't remember any big building. But it's like an open pit quarry kind of thing.
An open pit, and this was many, many years ago.
Many years ago. And probably even before maybe not before the Bickelhaupts owned the land, but maybe.
Yeah, it was before that.
Yeah.
And there was a large hole there at one time. We did not know this, and Russ told us afterwards that he had a dozer come in and spent several days pushing off the hill and filling in the hole. Well, when we went to plant conifers in them areas, it had a thin topsoil.
Oh, okay.
So that did create a little bit of a problem, but we've worked with it and everything's worked out well.
Okay.
So when you enter the Heartland collection, the dwarfest miniature plants are along the path and you encounter them first.
Okay. The smallest ones first.
The smallest ones first. And as you proceed out through the collection, you get past the waterfall, then you're becoming into the intermediates and the large dwarfs.
Okay.
And we did that on purpose. Keep the smaller ones up front. And
sort of a gradient then as you walk through.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Once the site had been selected, the real work of designing the layout had begun. This, along with the purchasing and procuring of the actual plants, took this concept idea of a dwarf collection of conifers and began to make it a reality at the Arboretum. So when you guys started out and Chub proposed this idea, I'm guessing he had a layout in line for how he wanted to put things, correct?
That's correct.
So how did that come about?
Well, after the Bickelhaupts accepted their offer, Chub and Anna's Chub's wife.
Gotcha, all right.
And like I said, they're from Moline, Illinois. After they accepted the offer, Chub got busy right away. Of course, I helped him. We started drawing up plans, how we were going to lay out the collection. We had to move lilacs, and we had to prepare the site. So we put in a gravel path. This is all back in 1990.
Okay.
So a lot of planning went on in the spring and summer of 1990. As we got to fall, we started cutting out the beds.
Right.
We marked them out with marker guns, paint guns.
Okay.
So we could see the shapes and everything.
Yeah.
And then we'd look at it, then we'd change it.
Mm-hmm. So all that was done before you broke ground. Because
that's right.
Otherwise, once you start breaking ground, it's
too
once
late.
you start taking shovelfuls out, it's a little late by then. So it's good to outline all that out and be like, all right, it gives you a better visual of what it's going to look like.
That's right. So we did that, and of course we kept most of the sod because we had areas we wanted to sod in where we were removing lilacs and other plants. So we took the sod. So it took some time, all fall pretty much, and we prepared the location. Also, that year in October, Chub and I flew out to Portland.
Okay, why'd you fly to Portland?
We rented a car in Portland, went to Isley Nursery, which is at a small town named Boring, Oregon. It's in view of Mount Hood, if that helps. Wonderful view of Mount Hood.
Makes it less boring, I guess. But,
that's right. And Isley Nursery was kind enough to invite us out upon hearing that we were starting the Heartland collection. Mm-hmm. They were kind enough to invite us out. It's a wholesale nursery.
Oh, okay.
Where they would allow us to pick out the plants.
Oh.
So we could go through and pick any of the plants out that we wanted. We had to pay wholesale costs for them, which Chub paid.
Okay.
Chub's part of his bargain was to furnish all the plant material.
Okay.
So he paid for them, but we were able to pick out the very best out of every lot of plants, which I believe was around 130 plants.
Wow.
I think they also threw in some other plants too, but they had a sales representative take us all through the nursery, tour us the nursery, and we selected the prime plants, and we had a wonderful startup in the spring of 1991 using those plants.
Nice.
So that made a big difference and got us off to the right start at the beginning.
Yeah, it started out a good start for everything you needed for as you were going.
Yep.
And so you've laid things out, you've gone to Oregon, you've got your plants, you started planting them. How has it progressed since?
Well, when they first was started, I thought these plants are so small, they'll take forever to grow.
Yeah.
But immediately they took off. We kept them watered, we kept them mulched. They did very well. Chub and I kind of looked at the collection and we thought we need to add a couple highlights to the collection, main attractions, if you will.
Yeah.
So we thought about it, and just about this time, a teacher, an instructor over at Clinton High School approached us, Charlie Hunter.
Okay.
And he was also a local landscaper here in town, and he also liked conifers and dwarf plants. And he was doing a job at Connie and Terry Metzger's home. And there was a 20-foot white spruce in their yard with a witch's broom growing on it. Okay. And Charlie recognized this. The tree had to be removed.
Oh.
So Charlie recognized this, got a hold of us. We got a hold of Chub. Make a long story short, Chub hired Davy Tree Company to come up and dig that tree. It had to be dug by hand because of its size, and it was close to a sidewalk and some utilities.
All right.
So he couldn't get in a big machine. So they dug it by hand, Davy Tree did. They had experience with this previously, digging plants in Chub's yard for his first collection, the Harper collection.
Okay.
So they dug over at the site and dug this 20-foot tree. The staff of the Arboretum dug the big hole here where it was going. We thought this would be a perfect educational learning tool for visitors to come and see. We're already promoting the dwarf conifers. We're also promoting witches' brooms growing in the collection. to have an actual broom growing on a tree would be perfect.
Oh, yeah.
So they dug the tree. It had about a 7-foot across root ball, 3 feet deep. They used chains to keep the burlap on it and put heavy plywood under it to keep it from falling out. They lifted it onto a large flatbed truck with a truck boom.
Yep.
Because it weighed thousands of pounds.
I was going to say, that is not a small endeavor.
No, it was a large endeavor. Just for us to dig the hole was bad enough by hand. When they brought the tree over on the flatbed truck and they were lifting it off, part of the root ball collapsed, but we were able to get it into the hole and get it planted, and we had to stake the tree because it was 20 feet tall.
Yeah.
The tree lived and thrived. We took good care of it. We did lose the broom. We called the broom Metzger after the people that had the tree in their yard. And we propagated it and had a baby Metzger growing next to it.
Oh, nice.
But over time, the broom was on the inner part of the tree. And as we talked about earlier, the tree was growing faster than the broom. And we tried to keep it trimmed back, but we eventually lost the broom, unfortunately, in 2002.
Gotcha.
And we removed the tree at that point.
Oh, the whole tree?
Yeah, because it was disfigured from us pruning on it, trying to save the broom.
Trying to save it. All right, makes sense.
So that was a main focal point and attraction for a while. Another attraction that we came up with in 1991 was a planting of Alberta spruce. Which are common to buy, and they're cheap. So Chub bought 52 of them at different sizes, anywhere from like a foot up to like 4 foot.
Okay.
All different sizes. And we planted them right at the entrance, so when people would walk in, they'd look directly at this as they walked up the path. And it gave the impression of a miniature forest as you walked up.
Yeah.
Yep, we planted them with the tallest ones in the center and then kind of tapered them down, mixed them up. And of course, this covered an area about 20 feet by 10 feet in size and was quite a focal point for many, many years. Eventually, we ended up with some insect problems with it, and we decided to remove it.
But again, that's part of the story as well. These are living things. They're not a static collection. As they grow, as they mature, as the elements hit them, they change.
Yeah. So. One thing with Chub, too, when we started, he didn't want the collection to be a burden to the Bickelhaupts or the staff. Financially or for maintenance-wise. The maintenance was always a concern of Chub's. He was a head supervisor for Deere and Company for many years down in the Quad Cities. And he knew we were a small arboretum with a small staff. So we went with the free-form bed layout. And eventually we ended up with 32 beds. But if you can envision this, some gardens plant individual trees out in the lawn. Well, we laid out the large beds. Some of these beds had 12 to 15, 16 plants in them. And then we chipped all around them, so it was easy to maintain the bed with chips. It was easy to keep it weeded. It was easy to mow around it because you could just circle right around the bed.
Instead of circling around each individual tree, you're going around the whole unit.
That's right. And this really simplified the maintenance. Chub was always well known for maintenance and improving equipment, and I did learn a lot from him too over the years working with him.
Now that the collection had been planned, laid out, and planted, it was time to give it a name. David tells us how the name came about and why labeling the individual plants the way they have done was such an important tool for the educational purposes of the Arboretum. So why was it called the Heartland Collection?
The Heartland Collection came about. Chub Harper started the collection, and he had another collection up at Tipton, Michigan called the Harper Collection. And we threw around calling this the Harper 2, but we figured it would cause a lot of confusion. So Chub didn't want that. Upon talking with Randy Dykstra, who had a garden, his business was called the Heartland. Chub talked to Randy Dykstra, who had a business called Heartland Yard and Guard, decided that Heartland was an appropriate name for here in the Midwest.
Makes sense, yeah.
So with some discussion and talking over back and forth, we came up with the Heartland Collection of dwarf and rare conifers.
And it's now known, because this collection is known nationwide, isn't it?
Yes. Yep. It's of course, Chub, after we started the collection here, Chub became president of the American Conifer Society. The collection got a lot of publicity that way. And became nationally known, and still is today. We felt also along the way that labeling was important. We've decided the Bickelhaupts' method of using a black plastic label that's about 4 inches by 2.5 inches was a good way to do it. We have our own engraver that we engrave what we want on them. And from the start, Chub wanted the scientific names listed on the label. Over the years, we added the common name because a lot of people didn't know what the scientific name meant, the lay person. We did get a lot of people from colleges and universities and nurseries that did know, but we wanted to reach out to all the people. So we ended up with the scientific name, the common name. If it was a witch's broom, we put that on the tag. And then in the lower left-hand corner, we'd have an accession number. Basically, the accession number is like your social security number. The first number is the year it was planted, so people that come here can tell how old the plant is.
And what it will look like after so many years.
After so many years. And you can usually add about 5 years to that because we usually use plants that are 5 or 6 years old when we plant them.
All right.
So that's the year it was planted, and then there'd be a slash and like a 001. That would be the first plant planted that year.
Okay. So people would know, okay, here's how many plants you're planting in these years, here's how old they are, here's what they will look like, and things like that. And like you said, you've got a scientific name there, and you've got a common name. I tend to use it quite a bit when I bring my students around because I tell them, all right, this is commonly what people will know this by, but scientifically we know as this. And I also point out to them, going back to that whole witch's brew and the genetics, I said, these species here are all the same plant species, but genetically there's just a little bit of difference where you're going to get different shapes, different varieties, if you will, and that I use as a learning opportunity when I bring students around. So.
Yeah, and that was the main reason we went with the labels like that. People come here to learn, and that's very important, the labeling. Yeah. And these are attractive labels. They don't distract from the plants or the grounds at all. So.
They're subtle without being so subtle you can't find them, but yet without being so big that it takes away from what you're trying to look at, which is the plant. They're informative, and that's the whole point behind them.
That's right. That's the goal.
That's the goal.
So as we have learned, conifers come in many shapes and sizes, but the ones in the Heartland collection are of the dwarf variety. This collection shows off many of the options that people could have if they wanted to use these slower growing, shorter plants in their yards and landscapes. As has been pointed out, upkeep and maintenance with these plants can be simpler than other types of evergreens that are commonly used for landscaping. We have also gained insight as to how the planning and the layout for this particular collection occurred. We looked at what was involved in the proposal process, the designing of the different beds, and how there were some of the plants that were used were obtained and why they were used for this collection. This collection also provides a learning experience for people since the plants in the collection were so thoughtfully labeled. This system, which is used in all of the collections at the Arboretum, provides wonderful information for all people, whether they are new to learning about plants or academic scholars looking to gain new knowledge about very specific plants. I would like to thank David Horst for sharing these wonderful insights and expertise about this collection, and to Otis Welch for the musical selection.